Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something today that impacts literally every single one of you,
It really does.
no matter what kind of work you do or even if you're retired.
Right.
It's all about business continuity planning,
BCP.
BCP or BCP. Yeah, and trust me, this isn't just for big corporations or tech companies. We're
Yeah.
talking every organization,
Yeah.
from your local grocery store to your child's school, needing a plan to keep things running when the unexpected happens.
When disaster strikes.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got some great sources lined up for this deep dive.
Awesome.
But our main guide's going to be Chapter 3 of the CISSP Study Guide, 10th edition, 2024.
Oh, yeah. That's the Bible.
Yeah. So I've been reading up on this, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating stuff.
It is.
But I have to admit, some of it went right over my head.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, we have our expert here to break it down and make it relevant to you.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
One of the first things that tripped me up was the difference between business continuity planning, BCP, and disaster recovery planning, DRP.
Right.
Can you help clear that up for me and for our listener?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's a very common point of confusion.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Have you ever seen a play?
Oh, tons of time. I love live theater.
I do too.
There's just something so magical about it.
It's a really great art form.
Yeah.
Well, imagine BCP is like the director of that play.
Okay.
They're focused on the big picture,
Yeah.
making sure the show goes on no matter what happens backstage.
Mm-hmm.
DRP, on the other hand, is like the stage crew.
Uh-huh.
They're the ones scrambling to fix a broken prop or quickly change the scenery if something goes wrong.
Right.
Both essential for a successful performance,
Yeah.
but they have different roles and perspectives.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the difference.
Good.
So BCP is strategic,
Yes.
like setting the overall direction,
Exactly.
while DRP is more tactical, focusing on the nuts and bolts of recovering specific systems.
Precisely. Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
So BCP is about ensuring the business as a whole can continue operating even in a limited capacity.
Okay.
When disruptions occur, DRP is about getting those specific technical systems back up and running as quickly as possible.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let's say you're a small business owner running a bakery.
Okay. Love it.
BCP would be about figuring out how to keep selling bread,
Yeah.
even if your oven breaks down,
Uh-huh.
while DRP would be about getting a new oven
Right.
or finding a temporary solution to get that oven back up and running quickly.
Exactly. BCP might involve having a backup supplier for your ingredients or using a smaller oven in a pinch
I see.
or even partnering with another bakery temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
DRP would be all about fixing that main oven as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And this is why BCP is relevant to everyone.
Right.
Even if you don't think of yourself as a business,
Yeah.
your business might be your daily life.
Mm.
How do you get to work if your car breaks down?
Mm-hmm.
What if your childcare falls through?
Yeah. Good point.
Having a plan B or even a plan C can make all the difference.
That's such a good point. I think we often get so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget to plan for those what-ifs.
It's so true.
It's like we're so focused on baking the bread that we forget about the possibility of the oven breaking down.
Right, exactly.
But speaking of plans,
Yeah?
our trusty guidebook, the CISSP Study Guide, lays out 4 key phases in the BCP process.
Right.
It seems pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
There's definitely more to it than just reading a checklist.
Right.
Each phase has its own challenges and pitfalls.
Sure.
And that's where real expertise comes in.
For sure.
But before we get into those, let's just quickly outline the 4 phases.
Okay.
First, we have project scope and planning, which is kind of like laying the foundation for your BCP.
Okay.
You need to assemble your team, figure out your budget, and define the scope of your plan.
Uh-huh.
This is also where you start considering any external factors that might come into play, like regulations or dependencies on third-party vendors.
So it's like gathering your ingredients and preheating the oven
Yeah.
before you start baking that BCP cake.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like baking a cake rushing through this first phase can lead to a disaster later on.
Yeah, for sure.
I've seen organizations try to skip this step and jump right into risk assessment,
Oh, no.
only to realize later that they didn't have the right people involved or they hadn't considered all the relevant factors.
Woo. It's got to be painful.
It can be very painful.
So taking the time to really define the scope and plan things out can actually save time and headaches down the road.
Absolutely. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for the next phase, which is arguably the most crucial part of the entire BCP process, the business impact analysis, or BIA.
Okay, the BIA, this is where things get really interesting, but also a bit intimidating.
Right.
I mean, how do you even begin to analyze the potential impact of every possible disruption? It feels
Yeah.
like trying to predict the future.
It can definitely feel overwhelming, and I think that's why some organizations get stuck in this phase.
Mm,
They get so bogged down in the details that they never actually move on to creating a plan.
right.
But here's the thing. The BIA doesn't have to be perfect.
Okay.
It's more about identifying those critical functions
Right.
that absolutely M's keep running,
Uh-huh.
even in a disaster scenario.
So it's about figuring out what keeps the lights on, so to speak.
Exactly.
What are the core functions that, if they went down, would bring the whole operation to a screeching halt?
Exactly. For our bakery example, it might be the ability to bake bread,
Yeah.
take orders,
Uh-huh.
and process payments.
Right.
Those are the functions that, if disrupted, would have the biggest impact on the business.
And I'm guessing this is where we start talking about things like maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD,
Yeah.
and recovery time objective, or RTO. Those acronyms always trip me up.
They can be mouthful, but they're actually pretty simple concepts once you break them down.
Okay, good.
Think of it this way. Imagine you break your leg.
Oh, ouch. I'd rather not.
Oh, hopefully you never have to experience that.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this example, let's say you do.
Okay.
The MPD is like, how long can you hobble around on that broken leg before you absolutely have to see a doctor?
Okay.
Can you tough it out for a day, a week, or does it need immediate attention?
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so MTD is the maximum amount of time a critical function can be down
Yes.
before it causes serious, irreparable damage to the business.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the RTO is like, how long will it take to get that broken leg fixed
Yeah,
and be back on your feet?
gotcha.
Surgery, recovery, physical therapy, it all takes time.
Yeah, for
That's
sure. So RTO is the target time frame for getting a critical function back up and running after a disruption.
Precisely.
Okay.
And ideally, that RTO is shorter than the MTD,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to wait longer to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Then you can actually afford to be down.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And that's why a good BIA not only identifies those critical functions, but also determines their MTD and RPO.
Okay.
It's about understanding the impact of a disruption, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of money, reputation, and even customer satisfaction.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense, but we've only scratched the surface of the BIA.
Right.
There's still so much more to explore, like the difference between quantitative and qualitative impact, and how to actually prioritize those risks once you've identified them.
Absolutely.
I think we need to dedicate a whole other segment to this fascinating and slightly scary world of the BIA.
I agree. The BIA is truly the heart of BCP.
Yeah,
It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
makes sense.
And getting it right is essential for creating a plan that's both effective and actionable.
Right.
But before we dive deeper into that rabbit hole, let's quickly touch on the remaining two phases of the BCP process.
Okay.
After the BIA, we have continuity planning.
Uh-huh.
This is where we take all that data we gathered
Mm.
and start developing strategies and specific procedures to mitigate those identified risks.
So this is where we move from analysis to action, right?
Correct.
It's like we've diagnosed the problem, now we need to prescribe the treatment.
Exactly. And just like a doctor wouldn't prescribe the same treatment for every patient,
Yeah.
we need to tailor our continuity plan to the specific needs and risks of our organization.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need backup systems, redundant infrastructure,
Right.
alternative work locations?
Yeah.
This is where we start making those decisions.
And I'm guessing this is where things can get really creative, right?
Absolutely.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope.
So we need to think outside the box and come up with innovative ways to keep things running, even when the unexpected happens.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this phase so interesting.
Yeah.
It's about finding those practical and sometimes unconventional solutions that will work for your specific organization.
Okay, so we've analyzed the risks,
Right.
developed the plan. What's next? Do we just cross our fingers and hope for the best?
Definitely not. The final phase is plan approval and implementation.
Okay.
And this is where we make sure the plan actually gets off the ground and becomes part of the organizational culture.
Right.
We need to get buy-in from leadership-trained employees, test the plan, and keep it updated as things change.
Yeah.
BCP is not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process that requires constant attention and adaptation.
So it's like a living, breathing document that evolves as the organization evolves.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a dedicated team
Hmm.
responsible for BCP,
Yeah.
not just treat it as a side project.
Right.
BCP is an investment in the future of the organization, and it's an investment worth making.
This has been an incredible overview of the BCP process. I'm already feeling more informed and, dare I say, even a little bit empowered.
Awesome.
But I'm also realizing that the BIA is a beast of its own that deserves a closer look.
I agree. The BIA is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
It's where we turn those vague what-ifs into concrete data points that we can use to build a truly resilient organization.
Absolutely.
So buckle up, listener, because we're about to dive deep into the fascinating world of the BIA in part 2 of our BCP Deep Dive.
Can't wait.
Welcome back, Deep Divers. I hope you're ready to delve into the nitty-gritty of the Business Impact Analysis,
Oh, yeah.
or BIA, because it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Okay.
It's about understanding the heartbeat of your organization,
Okay.
what makes it tick, and what could potentially make it skip a beat.
Okay, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get analytical.
Great.
But before we dive into the actual steps of a BIA, I think it's important to understand why it's so crucial to the whole BCP process.
Yeah.
We touched on it a bit in the last part, but I think it's worth emphasizing.
Absolutely. You know how doctors always say prevention is better than cure?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the BIA is kind of like a preventative health checkup for your organization.
Okay.
It helps you identify those potential vulnerabilities before they become full-blown crises.
So it's like getting a stress test for your business, seeing how much pressure it can handle before cracking.
Exactly. And just like a stress test can reveal underlying health issues, the BIA can highlight those critical areas where your organization might be at risk.
Okay.
Maybe you're overly reliant on a single supplier,
Right.
or your data isn't properly backed up, or your employees haven't been trained on what to do in an emergency.
Right.
These are all things that might not be obvious on a day-to-day basis, but they can become major problems if a disruption occurs.
Okay, I'm definitely seeing the value of a BIA.
Good.
It's like taking a proactive approach to risk management rather than just reacting to problems as they pop up.
I like that.
But let's get down to brass tacks here.
Okay.
How do we actually de-do a BIA?
Right.
Where do we even begin?
Well, just like any good investigation, we start by asking the right questions.
Okay.
The first step is identifying priorities.
Okay.
What are the core functions that make your organization tick? What are the processes, systems, and resources that are absolutely essential for your day-to-day operations?
So for our bakery example from earlier, that would be things like baking the bread, taking orders, processing payments, and delivering those delicious goods to customers.
Exactly. And it's not just about listing those functions, but also understanding their interdependencies.
Okay.
For example, if the ovens go down, not only can you not bake bread, but you also can't fulfill orders or generate revenue.
Right.
It's like a domino effect.
So we're not just identifying individual functions, but also mapping out how they connect and rely on each other.
Right.
It's like creating a flowchart of the entire business.
Precisely. And that's what makes the BIA so powerful.
Okay.
It gives you a holistic view of your organization and helps you understand those critical points of vulnerability.
Okay.
Once you've identified those priority functions, the next step is risk identification.
Okay. Risk identification. This is where we put on our detective hats and start brainstorming all those potential threats that could disrupt those critical functions, right? Natural disasters, cyber attacks, equipment failures, pandemics, the list goes on and on.
It can definitely feel overwhelming,
Right.
but there are resources available to help you think through all the possibilities.
Okay.
The CISSP study guide, for example, provides a really comprehensive list of potential threats categorized by type and severity. You can also look at industry-specific reports, news articles, and even historical data to get a sense of what kinds of disruptions have impacted similar organizations in the past.
So it's about doing your research and being as thorough as possible. It's like creating a risk profile for your organization.
Exactly. And the more comprehensive your risk identification is, the more effective your BCP will be.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Not all risks are created equal.
Right.
Some are more likely to occur than others, and some will have a much bigger impact if they do occur. That's why the next step in the BIA is likelihood assessment.
Okay, likelihood assessment. This is where we separate the what-ifs from the oh-nos, right?
Exactly.
Figuring out which threats are actually worth worrying about and which ones are more like remote possibilities.
Exactly. It's about assigning a probability to each identified risk.
Okay.
How likely is it to occur in the next year,
Mm-hmm.
the next 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
the next 10 years?
Right.
And there are tools and methodologies available to help you make those assessments.
Okay.
You could look at historical data, industry trends, and even expert opinions to get a more objective view of the likelihood of different types of disruptions.
So for our bakery example, the likelihood of a minor power outage might be fairly high,
Hmm.
while the likelihood of a major earthquake might be much lower,
Right.
depending on the location, of course.
Precisely. And this likelihood assessment is crucial for prioritizing your mitigation efforts.
Okay.
You'll want to focus your resources on those risks that are both highly likely and highly impactful.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually measure the impact of a potential disruption?
Right.
I mean, how do you put a dollar amount on something like lost productivity or damage to your reputation?
That's where the fourth stage of the BIA comes in, impact analysis.
Okay.
And this is where things can get a bit complex
Okay.
because we're talking about both quantitative and qualitative impacts.
Okay. Break that down for me. What's the difference between quantitative and qualitative impact?
Quantitative impact is all about the numbers.
Okay.
How much money would you lose if your operations were disrupted? How much would it cost to repair or replace damaged equipment? How much revenue would you miss out on?
Right.
These are all measurable, tangible impacts that can be expressed in financial terms.
So for our bakery, a quantitative impact might be the cost of replacing a broken oven
Yeah.
or the lost revenue from not being able to bake peak for a week.
Exactly. And these numbers can be really eye-opening, especially for small business owners who might not have fully considered the financial ramifications of a major disruption. But the impact goes beyond just dollars and cents.
Right.
That's where qualitative impact comes in.
Okay, so qualitative impact is about those intangible factors that are harder to measure, but just as important, right?
Exactly.
Things like damage to your reputation, loss of customer trust, or even employee morale.
Precisely. These are the things that can be harder to quantify, but can have a long-lasting impact on your business.
Oh, okay.
Imagine our bakery gets hit with a foodborne illness outbreak.
Ooh, yeah.
Even if they can quickly contain the situation and get back to baking,
Uh-huh.
the damage to their reputation could take years to repair.
Right.
Customers might be hesitant to return,
Right.
and negative reviews could linger online, impacting their ability to attract new business.
Wow, that's a really good point. It's like the saying, it takes years to build trust, but only seconds to destroy it.
Right.
And that destruction can happen in the blink of an eye if you're not prepared.
Exactly. And that's why a thorough BIA considers both the quantitative and the qualitative impacts of potential disruptions. It's about painting a complete picture of the potential consequences, both financial and non-financial.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Good.
But where do we go from here?
Right.
We've identified the critical functions, brainstormed potential threats, assessed their likelihood, and analyzed their impact.
Yes.
It's a lot of information to process.
It is, but that's the beauty of the BIA.
Okay.
It takes all that complexity and boils it down into actionable insights.
Right.
And the final step of the BIA is where we put those insights to work. Resource prioritization.
Okay. Resource prioritization. This is where we have to make some tough decisions, right?
You got it.
We can't mitigate every single risk, so we need to focus on those that pose the biggest threat to our business.
Exactly. It's about looking at your risk profile and deciding where to allocate your limited resources, time, money, personnel, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you invest in backup generators to mitigate the risk of power outages?
Right.
Do you implement cybersecurity measures to protect against cyber attacks? Do you develop a robust communication plan to manage a reputational crisis?
So it's about finding that sweet spot between being prepared and being practical.
Yeah.
You don't want to overspend on mitigation,
Right.
but you also don't want to be caught flat-footed if disaster strikes.
Precisely. And that's why resource prioritization is often a collaborative effort
Okay.
between the BCP team, senior management, and even key stakeholders outside the organization.
Yeah.
It's about having those difficult conversations and making strategic decisions that align with the overall goals and values of the business.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Glad to hear it.
But we've been laser focused on the BIA for a while now.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take a breather here and explore those remaining BCP phases.
Okay.
Continuity planning and plan approval and implementation in the next part of our deep dive.
I agree. We've laid a solid foundation with the BIA, and now it's time to build upon that foundation by creating a plan that's both comprehensive and actionable. So join us for part 3 of our DCP adventure, where we'll take all those BIA insights and turn them into a roadmap for organizational resilience.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into business continuity planning. I have to say, after that deep dive into the BIA, I'm feeling a lot more prepared, but also a little overwhelmed.
Yeah,
Like, we've identified all these potential risks, but now what?
right.
How do we actually put a plan in place that will work when it matters most?
It's a common feeling the BIA can be a bit like opening Pandora's box. You
Uh,
suddenly become aware of all these potential threats that you never really considered before.
right.
But the good news is you've already done the hardest part.
Okay.
You've identified your critical functions, assessed the risks, and prioritized your resources.
Okay.
Now it's time to move from analysis to action, and that's where continuity planning comes in.
Okay, continuity planning. This is where we take all those insights from the BIA and turn them into a real actionable plan, right? But where do we even begin? It still feels like a pretty daunting task.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Think of continuity planning as building a bridge between where you are now and where you want to be in the event of a disruption.
Okay.
And just like building a bridge, you need a solid blueprint and a clear understanding of the terrain.
Okay.
So let's break it down into manageable steps.
hmm
The first step is strategy development.
Strategy development. So this is where we start brainstorming solutions, right?
Yeah,
Figuring out how to mitigate those risks we identified in the BIA.
exactly. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
hmm
The strategies you choose will depend on the specific needs and risks of your organization.
Right.
But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Continuity planning isn't just about technology and infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
It's also about people.
Okay. People, we talked about that a bit in the context of qualitative impact, but how does it play into continuity planning specifically?
Well, think about it. What good is a disaster recovery plan if your employees don't know what to do or where to go?
Right.
Or if they're not able to access critical information because it's locked away in a flooded server room?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure our people are safe, informed, and equipped to do their jobs, even in a disaster scenario.
Exactly. And that means having things like evacuation plans, emergency communication systems, and even backup childcare or elder care options.
No.
If those services are disrupted, it's about taking care of your most valuable asset, your people.
That's a really important point, and it's something I think a lot of organizations overlook. It's easy to get caught up in the technical aspects of BCP and forget about the human element.
Yeah.
But let's talk about those technical aspects for a minute.
Okay.
What are some of the key areas we need to consider when developing our continuity plan?
Well, one of the most important areas is infrastructure.
Okay.
This is where we look at all the systems, equipment, and facilities that are essential for your operations. Do you have backup servers, redundant internet connections, alternative work locations? And here's where the cloud comes into play. Are you leveraging cloud services to make your infrastructure more resilient?
Right. Cloud computing has definitely changed the game when it comes to BCP. It's like having a built-in backup system for your data and applications.
It can be. But it's important to remember that the cloud isn't a magic bullet.
Right.
You still need to carefully consider your cloud provider's continuity plans and make sure they align with your own needs and requirements.
Okay.
But beyond infrastructure, we also need to think about data protection.
Okay.
How are you backing up your critical data?
Mm-hmm.
How often are those backups tested?
Right.
And how quickly can you restore that data if you need to?
Data is definitely the lifeblood of most organizations these days, so protecting it is essential.
Absolutely.
And I'm guessing this is where things like recovery point objective or RPO come into play, right?
Yes,
Determining how much data loss is acceptable in a disaster scenario.
exactly. And the RPO will vary depending on the type of data and the criticality of the function it supports. For example, if you're a financial institution,
Yeah.
you might have a very low RPO for customer transaction data,
Uh-huh.
while a marketing agency might have a higher tolerance for losing some marketing materials.
Okay.
But beyond data protection, we also need to consider communication in our continuity plan.
Right.
How will you communicate with employees, customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders during a disruption?
Communication is definitely key in any crisis situation. You need to keep everyone informed and on the same page, or chaos can quickly ensue.
Absolutely. And that means having a clear communication plan in place
Okay.
with designated spokespeople, pre-drafted messages, and multiple communication channels, email, text, social media, and even old-fashioned phone calls.
Right.
But communication isn't just about disseminating information. It's also about listening.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to receive feedback from your stakeholders and adjust your plans accordingly.
So it's a two-way street. You're not just broadcasting a message, you're also actively engaging with your stakeholders and incorporating their feedback into your response.
Exactly. And that's what makes continuity planning so dynamic.
Yeah.
It's not a static document. It's a living, breathing process that evolves as the situation changes.
This is all incredibly insightful, but I'm realizing that continuity planning is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
We still need to get buy-in from leadership, implement the plan, and make sure it actually works when we need it.
You're absolutely right. Developing a great plan is only half the battle. We also need to make sure it gets off the ground and becomes part of the organizational culture.
Right.
And that's where the final phase of BCP comes, in plan approval and implementation.
Okay. Plan approval and implementation. This is where we move from theory to practice, right? But I'm guessing there's more to it than just handing out copies of the plan and saying, good luck.
There's definitely more to it than that.
Mhm.
First and foremost, you need to get buy-in from the top. The senior leadership needs to understand the importance of DCP and be willing to invest the necessary resources,
Mm.
time, money, and personnel
Right.
to make it a success. And that buy-in needs to be more than just lip service.
Yeah.
It needs to be reflected in the organization's budget policies and even performance evaluations.
So it's about making BCP a core part of the organizational culture, not just the side project that gets pushed aside when other priorities come up.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to involve senior leadership throughout the entire BCP process,
Yeah.
not just at the end when it's time to sign off on the plan.
Mm.
They need to be part of the conversation, understand the risks, and contribute to the solutions.
Okay.
Once you have that leadership buy-in, the next step is to actually implement the plan.
Okay.
And this is where things can get tricky.
Okay. What are some of the common challenges organizations face when implementing a BCP?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is simply getting everyone on board. People are busy.
Hmm.
They have their own priorities, and they might not see the value in BCP until it's too late. That's why it's so important to communicate the benefits of BCP clearly and concisely, and to make sure everyone understands their role in a plan. Training is essential here.
Training makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't expect people to follow a plan if they don't know what it says or how to execute it.
Right.
But what kind of training are we talking about here? Classroom lectures, online modules, simulated disaster scenarios?
It can be a combination of all of those things. The key is to tailor the training to the specific needs of your organization and the roles of your employees.
Okay.
Some people might need a high-level overview of the plan, while others might need in-depth training on specific procedures. And don't forget about ongoing training and refresher courses. BCP is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, so we've trained everyone, the plan is in place,
Okay.
and we're feeling pretty confident. Can we finally relax?
Not quite the final and arguably most important step in plan approval and implementation is testing and exercises.
Testing, like a pop quiz on disaster preparedness.
Well, not exactly a pop quiz, but definitely a test. Remember how we talked about the importance of testing those data backups?
Yeah.
Well, the same principle applies to the entire BCP.
Yeah.
You need to test your plan regularly to make sure it actually works and that your employees know what to do.
So we're talking about simulating different disaster scenarios and seeing how well our plan holds up. Kind of like a fire drill for the whole organization.
Exactly. And there are different levels of testing. You might start with tabletop exercises,
Uh-huh.
where the team walks through a scenario and discusses how they would respond.
Right.
Then you can move on to more complex simulations,
Right.
where you actually activate those backup systems, relocate to an alternative site, and communicate with stakeholders in real time.
Wow. Okay, so it's about putting the plan through its paces and identifying any gaps or weaknesses before a real disaster happens.
Precisely. And testing isn't just about finding flaws in the plan. It's also about building confidence and muscle memory. The more familiar your employees are with the procedures, the more likely they are to respond effectively in a real crisis.
This has been an incredible deep dive into business continuity planning. From the initial risk assessment to the final testing and exercises, we've covered a lot of ground. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they embark on their own BCP journeys?
This BCP isn't just about protecting assets. It's about protecting people's livelihoods and dreams. It's an investment in the future of your organization, and it's an investment worth making.
Beautifully said. And remember, listeners, this is just the beginning of your BCP journey. There are tons of resources available online, in libraries, and through professional organizations. And don't be afraid to reach out to experts in the field for guidance and support. BCP might seem daunting at first, but with a little effort and a lot of planning, you can create a roadmap for organizational resilience that will help you weather any storm. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into DCP. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay resilient.